Brought to you by Pro Guides. Last December, Papa Penny invited me on a ski vacation, which took away from me being able to update this channel. But that was fine. I had already gathered my thoughts in regards to the Rastakhan meta and how it wasn't humongously impactful, much to my chagrin. But the real fun day was December 19th. I was halfway falling down a mountain when I suddenly received a notification that, surprise, new nerfs were coming. That day. Sadly, I had other things to attend to at that moment, then Christmas, then Mother Nature tried to kill me, and now nearly a month has passed and I have no idea what's going on. So today, let's end it. Let's figure out what the hell happened. Greetings and welcome to Hearthstone Theory. December 4th, 2018. Rastakhan's Rumble was released to the public, and as a result, maybe 3 decks were added to the meta. I mean, not bad, but I would probably argue that there was a general wish for the Rumble's results to have been a bit more impactful. 2 weeks later, it appears our concerned cries did not fall on deaf ears, for Blizzard suddenly nerfed Odd Paladin, Kingspade Rogue, any deck that utilized Saturnight Chaingang, and Druid. Like, all of Druid. Like, seriously, these cards were iconic Druid and they've both been hit, what the heck? Blizzard credits several of these nerfs to be for the good of Wild, but that's only one variable in this discussion. More important for us is the fact that these nerfs have allowed for Hunter's dominance in Standard. The story of Hunter's current success is a long one, and not the focal point of today's episode. Today we'll be looking at Rastakhan's Rumble, how it worked and how it didn't, and then how these unexpected nerfs managed to solve some problems while bringing out new ones. By the end of this video, we will hopefully have a good idea of why this all occurred and what we can expect from the future. As always, leave your thoughts in the comments section, and while you're down there, you may notice these buttons. Now, no pressure, but here's an official hierarchy of how good of a person you are depending on which buttons you push. Just remember, if Gandhi would like and subscribe, why shouldn't you? Anyways, let's begin. First and foremost, a confession. I was wrong. At the announcement for Rastakhan, I got cocky. Drawing from past theories and the information at my disposal, I came to the conclusion that Rastakhan's Rumble would impact the game significantly. In the end, not so much. To my own credit, I wasn't entirely incorrect. Rastakhan does boast a slightly larger arsenal of in-meta cards than previous sets. When it comes to this latest set, the number of cards in at least 5% of decks, or in at least 2% of decks, has increased compared to Witchwood and Boomsday. This confirms my proclamation that this set would be the strongest of the 3. The flaw in my logic was that I thought Rastakhan would be able to rival the power of Kobolds and Catacombs, or at least Journey to Ungoro. Turns out, while Rastakhan has 17.8% of its cards present in the meta and 6.7% being impactful, Kobolds has 32.6% and 14.1%. Not even close. Ungoro's percentages are a bit more comparable, but that's the weakest set of the Year of the Mammoth compared to the strongest set of the Year of the Raven. Thus, by basic logic, the Year of the Raven has collectively been a weak year compared to the Year of the Mammoth. No wonder Rastakhan's results weren't heavily felt. So yes, I fully admit to my failure as a theorist, being unable to recognize the larger pattern present. The good news is I'm looking forward to the fireworks that will occur when those 3 powerful sets rotate out. The shifting of power will be monumental to behold. But why was Rastakhan weaker? Well, a general trend for the Year of the Raven was to prop up various decks, which would overall create a healthier meta. Baku and Gen were powerful cards that created over 18 new decks. Even if only a handful of them were viable, that's still a handful of decks by themselves. Couple that with other legendaries being cornerstone pieces of other unusual decks, and most cards being powerful only in specific circumstances, and we have the varied and polarized meta that we were all familiar with for the last several months. Fueled by the strength of only a few particularly powerful cards, but regardless. High-strength cards don't lend themselves to this structure of meta. Having decks with more powerful cards both props that deck up, while also making decks that counter the strong archetype more prevalent. Odd Paladin is strong, but its existence allows for control decks to be more powerful statistically. But Blizzard didn't want 3 archetypes deciding the meta, so for the Year of the Raven they diversified power. But with the strong cards of years past still around, this strategy made the initial release of Rastakhan less impactful. As mentioned before, there were just 3 new decks, while old ones still reigned supreme. So that's the situation Blizzard adopted at the start of the set. Another expansion lost, a few new decks to the very diverse pool, but since they aren't as powerful as they were previous, it's all for naught. Hence, nerfs. But most of these nerfs didn't exactly crush the strongest cards in the game. They instead targeted certain archetypes, oftentimes indirectly, and not in the exact ways that you might think. First up, level up. While getting rid of the burst power of Odd Paladin is all well and good, that deck isn't exactly lacking when it comes to replacements. This nerf hardly had a hiccup on Standard, but in Wild this prevents some other unruly combinations from occurring. Plus, it opens up the design space for future Silver Hand synergy, so that's neat too. Overall, the most lacking of the nerfs. Leeching Poison, meanwhile, leaves a gaping weakness in Kingsbane Rogue, the only deck that used this card. We've seen this plenty of times before, nerfs designed to leave decks exposed in certain areas. All in all, this is a welcome change, and shows that Wild players are being kept in mind for the future. Next, Saronite Chain Gang is often associated with a nerf to Shudderwalk, but it's a bit more subtle than that. Sure, the timing of this nerf removed the deck from Standard, but Frozen Throne's rotation would have done the same thing. Wild, meanwhile, has Doppelgangster, so the combination of cloning, Grumble, and Shudderwalking will continue to exist. But this nerf does other things as well. Deck and hand buffing provided by Keleseth, Soul Infusion, and the like is no longer quite as strong. The Chain Gang is still powerful enough to be present in most tempo decks, but many of its synergies have been weakened. That's the indirect nerf that is more significant, at least in the long term. That said, Shudderwalk being absent from the standard meta right now does have some negative connotations, which we'll get to soon. Anyways, these nerfs were not short-term nerfs, but they did have minute short-term effects, but no more than the Mana Worm nerf, for example. The real meta shifter came to be with the Druid nerfs, Wild Growth to 3 mana, and Nourish to 6. These changes are monumental. Ramping up a turn later with Wild Growth robs the player of one of their early game mana. That plus it costing 1 more means that Druids are operating with 2 less mana in the first handful of turns than they were previously. This wouldn't have been too much of a problem if they could just skip right to Nourish as well, but nope, that got moved up too, and also now leaves them with 2 less early game mana should they choose to ramp. That means that the Druid plan of ramp and then slaughter is now painfully exposed to murder, mostly in the form of rogues. Thus, the fall of Druid begins the cycle of meta definition. Rogue's hypothetical rise is stopped by Odd Warrior, which is arguably the strongest control deck in the meta right now. Then Odd Warrior is stopped by Beast Hunter, that's stopped by Paladin, and then Paladin is stopped by Druid. Oh wait, no they're not, Druid can't ramp up fast enough now. So this would mean Odd Paladin would win, but then control decks come along and snuff it out. No, you don't win, we still exist. But then Hunter points out, hold on, weren't we just doing this? And with that, the meta is defined with a triangle of effects. Control decks like Priest and Warrior stopping aggro, aggro doing its best to stop midrange, and midrange being dominated by Hunter variants. Hold on, you may be asking yourself, isn't this the exact situation Blizzard was trying to avoid? And the answer to that is yes! After a year of diverse decks and balance, if somewhat polarized games, Blizzard has failed in its mission. The meta is decided by less decks than previously, to the disappointment of players everywhere. And as we noted earlier, Shudderwalk Shaman's absence further skews this circumstance. This deck previously had elements of both a mid-range and a combo control deck, which did an interesting job rounding this meta. But with the Saronite nerf, no longer can this occur. To be perfectly clear, saying the meta is controlled by 3 archetypes doesn't discount Hunter's dominance. Quite the contrary. Hearthstone is a game that has always revolved around minion placement, also called tempo. This concept is a necessary one for most mid-range decks and the majority of aggressive decks. This makes tempo decks naturally have a leg up in the meta, even if other decks are capable of countering them. Hunter may be at approximately the same strength as other high-tier decks, but their placement as generally being mid-range gives them the edge in this situation. As a final point, these observations are all relative. This meta still has significantly more diverse decks than other metas in the past. The problem is that a lot of this diversity is monopolized by Hunter. Be it Spell, Death Rattle, Beast midrange, or Secret, Hunter has many variations of an overall mid-range archetype, leaving little room for decks like Even Shaman to show their face. And of course, there are a plethora of other reasons that Hunter have emerged on top for Rastakhan, too many to cover in this video. So the story of this meta is complete. A few control decks are rivaling a few aggressive decks, which are rivaling the Hunter collective. Don't get me wrong, the precise matchups between certain decks gets more complicated. Odd Rogue loses hard to Spell Hunter, and I sincerely have no idea why. But from a macro perspective, this is the situation. Now comes time for the more important question, what comes next? The possibility of Blizzard nerfing Hunter before the next expansion is not out of the question, but it would be weird for the company to implement 2 balance changes for one set. Then again, I never anticipated nerfs to occur less than 2 weeks after an expansion's release, and yet here we are. But I'll go off the assumption that none of these Hunter cards are going to change in the near future, meaning that the next shift we'll see will come with the New Year rotation. At that time, we'll see Ungoro, Frozen Throne, and Kobolds rotate out, which as mentioned is a humongous shift in power. Hunter by itself will lose its Death Rattle package, its Spell package, the key piece of its Secret package, the strongest hero card in the game, and Flanking Strike. And you know how broken I think Flanking Strike is. That's every single top tier Hunter deck brought down with this rotation. But this won't automatically open up other classes to take charge. We'll also see the losses of Bloodreaver Gul'dan, Psychic Scream, Vilespine Slayer, Defile, Frostlich Jaina, and more. Plenty of cards that define entire archetypes of the game now disappearing into Wild. That plus new cards entering in makes for a dramatic shift with many variables. So since we can't do a micro-analysis, we'll do a macro-analysis instead. There are two different ways that the next expansion could affect the status quo. Let's call them the optimistic view and the pessimistic view. Starting with pessimism, it's possible that the next expansion will continue to boost the simplistic ideas of aggro, midrange, and control without boosting decks that mix and match elements of these archetypes. More odd rogues as pure aggro tempo decks, less Shudderwock Shamans as control tempo combo decks. This hypothesis is supported by how Shudderwock and ramp style decks have been knocked down a peg, which to the short-sighted could be viewed as Blizzard's inclination to move away from those decks. Whether or not Blizzard intends this is unknowable, but I think it would be a horrendous mistake if so. As static as the Year of the Raven has been with its metas, it has also set the records for diversity and balance until recently. It would be a shame for Blizzard to backtrack on this progress just because everyone was complaining about Druid, Keleseth, and Shudderwock a lot. This leads to our more optimistic hypothesis. The idea that Blizzard is paving a metaphorical road, and these unusual deck variants that they have created may still exist in a weakened form. As extreme as the nerf to Druid was, it's still perfectly feasible to craft a ramp deck that leads to a Hakar Togwaggle naturalized combination. It's just that deck is weaker than others right now. However, with more common decks losing their more potent pieces, it stands to reason that these other archetypes could rise again. In fact, the nerf to Druid could allow Blizzard to design some more cards akin to Branching Paths, Ferocious Howl, and Ultimate Infestation. Cards that support this concept of a ramp deck while keeping the deck's weaknesses. This idea doesn't come without its own counter-arguments. After all, Druid is losing just as many powerful cards as these other classes are. At the same time, why nerf Saronite Chaingang now if not to slay Shudderwock? This action pretty much telegraphs that Blizzard believes that combo was a mistake. But plenty of unusual, lower power combinations are possible right now, so if they manage to become more powerful relatively, who knows? We may return to a meta that is once again diverse. But in the end, these hypotheses are irrelevant. The true nature of what Blizzard has sowed will only ever be revealed in time. The current meta looks unimpressive and unimaginative, but that doesn't guarantee that future metas will be subjected to the same fate. But Blizzard's really on the wire now. A shift this dramatic with such a mixed result has all players wondering what comes next. Diversity and intrigue, or rock, paper, scissors. Well, I've said it before, and I'll say it as many times as necessary to get the point across. The ball's in your court, Blizzard. Don't drop it. Are you interested in learning more about Hearthstone? If so, you should check out the sponsor for this episode, ProGuides. ProGuides provides its users with video lessons detailing different aspects of certain video games, particularly Hearthstone. In just a little bit of time on their site, I was able to go over the game's basic strategies, pick up on some deck building tips, and figure out just how terrible I am at playing aggro. They have over 100 lessons with topics ranging from core fundamentals to competitive play. Visit ProGuides.com to see the different courses this site has to offer. Seriously, if you want to work your way towards that 12-win arena run or finally reaching Legend, I can't recommend ProGuides more. Check them out, thank you all, and see you guys next time.